You are innocent until proven guilty. That's American law. The accused have rights. A jury must find you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It's hard to convict people. Often when people are convicted, there's a confession or maybe multiple witnesses or a very damning piece of evidence. So I'm surprised that I keep hearing about all these people who, because of DNA evidence or because someone else confessed, turn out to be innocent.
New evidence proved Scott and Carpenter are innocent of a 1994 drive-by shooting.
After 28 years behind bars for murder, Stephen Chaney walks free.
So how does it happen that all these innocent people go to jail? It's because of the way police are trained, says Deryn Strange of the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. You're a psychologist who studies things like false memories. How does that relate?
Memory doesn't work like a tape recorder. That means that I can very easily distort your memory by suggesting things that you didn't see, and over time they'll become incorporated into your memory report, and you'll report them as if they're your own stories.
Deryn gave us this photo to illustrate a point about memory. You who are watching, look at this picture. Now that the image is gone, let me ask you, do you remember the stop sign in the photo? Yes or no? How many of you remembered that there was a stop sign there? Actually, there was no stop sign. The first image we showed, that one, has a yield sign. So, Deryn, what's your point in these pictures?
My point is that this is a classic demonstration of how easily we can distort somebody's memory for what they've seen. Say you have two eyewitnesses who have observed this accident here. Well, there's about to be an accident. And one says, my God, they ran through a stop sign. The co-witness might have thought it was a yield sign, but because the other person is so confident, they take that on board and they start reporting it as though it's their story. So by the time the police arrive, they report that it was a stop sign. And the problem with that really is that police aren't interviewing eyewitnesses with rubber gloves on and shoe protectors. They're not treating memory evidence in the same way they're treating biological evidence, for example. So that means that it's set up so that it can be easily distorted and deteriorate over time.
It reminds me of this story here in New York. Headline says, witness accounts in Midtown hammer attack show the power of false memory.
Sometime last year, there was a series of hammer attacks. And after about 2 of these attacks, there was a woman who called the New York Times and said that she had seen the police shoot somebody who was already in handcuffs. Now, she hadn't. What happened here, and what this example illustrates quite powerfully, is how our expectations can shape what we see. The media was flooded with examples of bad police practices.
So the witnesses aren't necessarily making something up. They really think they saw something that never happened.
Absolutely.
And of 342 people exonerated with DNA evidence,
75% of them had an eyewitness pointing the person out in the courtroom, having already picked them out of a lineup.
convincing the jury.
Convincing the jury that they committed the crime. And worse than that, 2/3 of those cases had more than one eyewitness doing the same thing.
The one that gets me is these people get exonerated by DNA evidence. They're innocent, and yet they confessed.
They did.
Why would people confess to a crime they didn't commit?
Well, of those 342 cases, 20% of them included a false confession. The reason why they would falsely confess largely comes down to the way that police are interviewing suspects.
How does he get them to confess? They don't beat them anymore.
No, they don't beat them anymore, but they do the equivalent from a psychological perspective. So the only people that get into the interrogation phase are people that the officer believes are actually guilty. So once they get into this room, which is designed to break down all of your psychological barriers, it's grey and you've got the interrogators staring at you, they're essentially providing the scaffolding through a bunch of coercive techniques to elicit a confession out of you.
How?
So they'll
If I didn't do it, I'm not going to say I did.
You really believe that your innocence is going to shine through. So you're trying really hard to help the investigator, and the investigator thinks you're guilty. If the crime is murder, you'll be told, they'll say something like, well, everyone's better off now that they're off the street. You did the right thing. And then embedded...
Yeah, I'm glad he's off the street, but I didn't kill him.
Right, you didn't kill him. But now we're going to turn to the phase where we're going to start building your story. So they might suggest, for example, that, well, DNA places you at the scene of the crime. They might bait them with a particular question along the lines of, well, how would you explain your fingerprints being found on the gun? They might not
start to believe I did commit the crime?
Well,
or I just want to please the officers?
It could be any of those things, but it could be, essentially, the gun doesn't have to exist. They might not have found it, and if they did, your fingerprints probably weren't on it. So did you bring the gun? Was that your choice, or did your friends suggest that you take it along?
I didn't have a gun.
Okay, well, John, clearly I'm not going to be able to get you to confess.
Well, I guess they work on them for a long time.
Most of those people who did confess were interrogated for more than 12 hours. Nobody can sustain that kind of psychological pressure in that environment.
Thank you, Deryn Strange.
Thank you.
Next.